Welcome back to another edition of This Day in Warbird History. Today is 12 May 1936, and this is the Warbird Mistress with Zerstörer Vorwärts. The Messerschmitt Bf 110, a well-known frontline fighter that flew throughout World War II, but not without controversy. Unmaneuverable, slow, and riddled with a spotty development history, it would also come to be feared by the Allies as it matured into a valuable asset. The 110's story is one that mirrors closely the dynamism of aerial warfare philosophy from the end of the Great War through to the end of the Second War. At the heart of it all, we have that glorious bestseller of mirth and merriment, Giulio Douhet's Il Dominio dell'Aria, in which he describes a future where no soldier will have to fight in trenches, and destruction instead will be conveniently rained down on civilian populations by masses of invincible bombers loaded with chemical weapons. This cheery little volume was eaten up by the French and British and served with a side of tunnel vision when it came to aircraft development and deployment. Such was not the case, however, in Germany. German air warfare theory managed to avoid the wildly romantic, impractical, one-man opioid epidemic Göring and the bomber-obsessed Bohemian corporal, thanks to Chef des Generalstabes der Luftwaffe, Major General Walter Wever. Wever, a Great War veteran and member of the Reichswehr's High Command, completely disagreed with Douhet. He saw the destruction of the will to fight as a consequence of defeat in the field, not destruction of civilian infrastructure, even if of mixed purpose. While others saw tactical air power as a separate doctrine from strategic air power, Wever saw the two as complementary. Taking into account the geography of Germany's inevitable enemy, the Soviet Union, he knew that a strategic bombing force and tactical strike force must be melded into a single air force that would be of the equal of other services. His priorities would be to destroy morale and the will to fight by destroying the means of carrying out that fight. First, enemy air forces had to be destroyed together with their bases and manufacturing means. Interceptors were necessary to protect one's own resources, Douhet be damned. Second, transportation infrastructure had to be destroyed in front of an advancing army. Third came vehicles. Rolling stock, armored units, and motorized or mechanized columns had to be harassed, and ground operations needed to be closely supported by tactical strike aircraft. Fourth, naval bases had to be eliminated, German naval assets protected, and naval air power used as an integral part of sea battles and campaigns, both by land and by aircraft carrier. Finally, armaments factories must be utterly paralyzed, leaving enemy units helpless at the front. By comparison to Douhet's 5 principles, Wever's unique perspective is seen. Douhet argued that the bomber will always get through, either because of speed or ingenuity of the pilots, but they will get through. 2. Civilian targets are priorities: industry, infrastructure, communications, government, and centers of population. 3. Your enemy's willpower and stamina are the ultimate targets of bombing. 4. Interception is futile. Fighters are escorts and patrol planes. 5. A bombing cycle of explosives, incendiaries, and then poison gas will destroy cities and prevent them from being rebuilt. Wever argued, escorted bombers might get through. 2. The means of war are priorities: air bases, heavy industry, transport infrastructure. 3. Production capacity is the ultimate target of bombing. 4. Strategic escorts and tactical interceptor or pursuit planes complement one another. There was no place in his practical, objective mind for the incendiary or chemical weapons of terror. As can be seen, if Germany kept with Wever's ideas, the war would perhaps have gone very differently. Wever pushed for his Ural bombers, such as the Dornier Do-19 and Junkers U-89. These were designed to reach far into Soviet territory and eliminate production capacity beyond the Ural Mountains. His, however, was an uphill battle. Certain drug-addled Reichsministers and national leaders felt these ideas were boring, tedious, and did nothing for the highly mobile war they thought would move so quickly as to preclude the need to bomb industries. They wanted something to meet strategic needs, tactical needs, and be able to defend itself. They wanted a tactical bomber, light bomber, power projection aircraft, air superiority fighter. They wanted what they called a battle destroyer. The Kampfzerstörer was designed to have the range of a bomber, be armed with cannon, have 3 crew members, carry a moderate internal bomb load, and be able to meet escort, pursuit, close air support, and long-distance light bombing roles. Now, the Kampfzerstörer was not the only idea around for long-range fighters with strategic rather than tactical roles. For Göring, the idea of a battle destroyer was romantic and exciting, and that was all the motivation he needed. However, there is a huge difference between the Luftwaffe's request for a Zerstörer and the bomber-destroyers of Britain, America, the Netherlands, and France. Both are heavy fighters, both called for increased range and heavy armament. However, Zerstörers were not designed to loiter for hours waiting to pounce on incoming waves of heavy bombers. At the same time, bomber-destroyers were never asked to perform fighter-bomber roles at all, even if many found themselves in that capacity during the war. The Bel Air Akuta was halfway between the two ideas. Termed a convoy fighter, it was fast, had cannon and both heavy and rifle-caliber machine guns, and had them in fixed and flexible positions, including in engine nacelles. She also could carry 20 30-pound fragmentation bombs for anti-personnel strikes. The Vickers Type 432 was also more of a Douhet-influenced high-altitude interceptor, designed to dive on fast-moving bombers with one pass, getting as many bombers as possible. The Westland Whirlwind, too, was designed to hover over frontiers at high altitudes and intercept fast-moving strategic bombers with cannon fire before the bombers escaped. The Defiant was designed as a counterpart interceptor, hovering at medium altitudes to intercept formations of bombers no fighter could hope to outspeed. The turret was integral to the idea that multiple levels of interceptors were needed if bombers were to be intercepted with any degree of success. Douhet had totally pervaded these nations' thoughts. In the United States, even though she felt protected by 2 oceans, the idea manifested in the P-38 Lightning, which was designed as a high-altitude, long-range, cannon-armed interceptor. Her medium-altitude counterpart was the Bell P-39 Airacobra. Maneuverability below 15,000 feet was of little importance to bringing down bombers at high altitudes with a 37mm cannon. All of these designs were made to intercept fleets and fleets of high-speed heavy bombers that were never to come. As these examples show, they did find usefulness elsewhere, such as in ground attack with the Airacobra, interception and escort with the Lightning, and night interceptor roles with the Defiant. Göring was in love with the idea of heavily armed, maneuverable, long-range superplanes. Wever went along with it in hopes that these might prove to be the escorts for his Eurobombers. Hitler liked anything that could carry bombs. This fantasy led to the publication of specifications for a plane to meet these pipe dreams in 1934, a time when Germany lacked the manufacturing prowess and engine design expertise to actually meet those specifications. Henschel, Focke-Wulf, Arado, and Messerschmitt were asked to compete, although Willy Messerschmitt knew that he was currently on the outs with the Megalomaniac Club of the Month. Arado, already on contract for the biplane fighters and trainers of the Luftwaffe, submitted no model. Henschel submitted the HS-124. With a rotating turret and stocky construction, she had 2 Junkers Jumo 210As in the first prototype. She had 2 7.9mm MG-15 guns in her turret and 2 20mm autocannon in each motor. She also had 600 kg internal bomb capacity, or could carry a dozen 50-kg bombs in a mixed external-internal load. The second prototype exchanged the Junkers motors for BMW 132 DC 9-cylinder radial engines. With the glazed nose, she resembled the French jack-of-all-trades, master-of-failure models being proposed at the time. With 2 20mm cannon and a flexible 7.9mm machine gun in the forward turret, she could also carry 600 kilograms of bombs. Slow, stodgy, heavy, and otherwise also resembling Göring, she was more bomber than bomber-destroyer if she was anything. Focke-Wulf took a much more advanced approach with their FW-57. Built to meet the requirements, she had a lot in a small package. In fact, she had too much. The The two Daimler-Benz 600A motors offered a maximum speed of 251 miles per hour and a cruising speed of 232 miles per hour at best. She carried 600 kilograms of bombs internally and had 3 forward-firing 20mm cannon and another 20mm cannon in an electric turret facing the rear. She met the requirements so well, however, that she could not meet them. She was too heavy, the turret threw off her center of gravity, and the motors were not powerful enough to offer sustainable performance. She crashed during the tests. Her design elements would be seen in other Focke-Wulf projects, like the FW-48 Weihe, a successful trainer for pilots, gunners, and navigators, as well as photo recon platform, VIP transport, and civilian passenger liner. More importantly, however, Korttanks' 1937 Focke-Wulf FW-187 addressed these problems by producing an intermediate two-engine fighter with the smallest possible fuselage. A fast, lightweight fighter with heavy forward-firing armament was designed to be an escort for the Schnell bombers being developed at the time, as well as a high-performance, high-altitude tactical fighter. The range and firepower of the Bf-110 with the maneuverability of the Bf-109, she was unwanted by the Luftwaffe. Hitler did not want heavy bombers whatsoever. He wanted Schnell bombers that carried light loads at fighter speeds to strike their targets. Göring found these attractive as well. This idea was out of Douhet's playbook, not Wever's. In this setting, bombers were expected to never need escorts. The He-70 Blitz in Spain and in foreign service was one example of this, as was its descendant, the He-111. The perfect example was 1934's Do-17, the Fliegende Bleistift high-speed bomber, entering service in 1937 and burdened to slower paces by 1939. The Zerstörer was to strike enemy targets deep in their heartland and be her own escort. The design chosen would be neither of these. The smaller, lighter Bf-110 was faster than the Henschel and Focke-Wulf, as well as faster than the Bf-109. However, she carried no bombs, as Messerschmitt felt performance would win him the competition, and making a bomber and heavy fighter was too much to ask of one plane with questionable power plants. The A model had Junkers Umo 210B motors, leaving her woefully underpowered. Her armament was reduced to 4 machine guns, her top speed cut to under 270 miles per hour, and the already dubious maneuverability was hampered even further. The B model, of which 45 were built, were not much better. These models were used for trainers, photo reconnaissance, and other tasks, but would not see service with the Zerstörer units which were skimming the top of the cream off the Luftwaffe's young crop. Many in the Luftwaffe hated Göring's pet project. She had no clear purpose, questionable performance, and manufacturing was so delayed that the squadrons she was supposed to be equipping were instead given Bf-109s and unclear training objectives, as well as the best Luftwaffe pilots to languish in them. Wever, however, was not among those who could object. Wever had been killed on 3rd of June 1936, less than a month after the Bf-110 prototype had flown. The Heinkel 70 Blitz he was flying crashed during takeoff thanks to slipshod pre-flight checks. His philosophies and foresight died with him, although the Eurobomber specifications had been published that very day. The Heinkel He-177 Greif would be his only legacy in a Luftwaffe that was deaf to his prophecies of the war to come. The Bf-110 would be a surprise to the Allies. Although she was seen in newsreels and air shows, very little was actually known about this unique fighter that was neither a tactical fighter, interceptor, bomber-destroyer, nor a multi-position heavy fighter, all of which were positions they understood as being integral to fighter doctrine. In fact, she merited only a few scant sentences in 1938's Jane's All-the-World Aircraft. Meanwhile, the Henschel HS-124 was thought to be a general-purpose craft in service. In the periodical Flights list issue of 1939, the HS-124 is depicted not only as being in active service, but being redesigned and participating in armed combat. It is unfortunate that such an excellent rendering was published over 3 years after the design had been rejected. This speaks to the intelligence gaps facing the Allies and the fear of German technical superiority that overwhelmed many, listed in aviation journals as being in active service. Here, for example, the Henschel 124 is described as an air cruiser, while the FW-57 is listed as a heavy bomber. The Messerschmitt Bf-161 recon plane was developed from the 110, but only 2 prototypes were completed and they never entered service. The Bf-162 bomber, however, was in service in large numbers, or so the Allies bought the story hook, line, and sinker. It was just a Bf-110B with a glazed nose. Allied intelligence was not exactly on the ball where the Luftwaffe was concerned, but at least it meant the B model served some purpose. It would be 1939's Bf-110C to be the model to truly enter service and finally equip all those squadrons that had been waiting 3 years for them. With 2 Daimler-Benz DB601A1 V12 inverted liquid-cooled piston engines of 1100 horsepower each, nearly twice that of previous motors, she reached 336 miles per hour and had a maximum continuous cruising speed of 301 miles per hour. She could reach 530 miles at that speed, or even stretch her range to 680 miles when practicing fuel economy. She had the original armament of 2 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns that she had been designed to carry. However, the rear gunner still only had a single rifle-caliber MG-15 machine gun, and he also had to reload the cannon's 60-round drums, with up to 3 being carried for each gun, totaling 180 rounds per cannon. Interestingly, during the war, many analysts saw Germany as doing exactly what Douhet proposed. The Germans had indeed switched over to Douhet's concepts of bombing, but this had only led to their failure to destroy the RAF in the Battle of Britain. While German propaganda spoke of bombing sorties overwhelming defenses and being uninterceptable, in practice the Germans were quite far from Douhet's ideals. The Bf-110 was horrible at its job. While successful as a light strike aircraft in the Low Countries and France, it fell to RAF fighters that outflew the bulky craft in droves. Instead of escorting the not-so-Schnell bombers, the Bf-109 had to escort the Bf-110s who were ostensibly escorting the bombers. The Luftwaffe over Britain was a matter of the blind escorting the blind and bloated, escorting the blind, bloated, and underarmed, all while on the leash of the Bf-109's limited range. That did not mean that the Bf-110 would be withdrawn from service, of course. Bulgarian, Romanian, German, and Italian squadrons all flew the 110. Even the insurrectionist Iraqi Air Force had some, as seen here. Where she did succeed was in the role of interceptor. Unescorted American crews reaching deep into Germany, Romania, Hungary, and Italy all had to contend with the upgraded models that pounded their bombers with cannon fire. As the war progressed and unescorted daylight raids became rarer, it was more often than not the case that it was the Bf-110 in gun sights rather than Allied or Soviet fighters. Still slow, unmaneuverable, and easily outflown by even early war fighters, the Mustang, Yak-3, Mosquito, Thunderbolt, and fittingly the Lightning, tore her to shreds during daylight hours. It was as a night fighter she truly came to shine, and the most successful versions of the plane were these. It took the better part of a decade to prove useful, but when she did so in a deadly way. The F model would be useful as a night fighter, although relying on ground radar for guidance. Later models, like this G4, had Liechtenstein radar sets of their own. Over 3,500 F and G night fighters would be produced. The G4, entering service in 1942, provided deadly responses to British terror bombings over the next 3 years thanks to their heavy guns, radar, and the unescorted night bombers' lack of protection from attacks coming below and behind. Together with the Junkers Ju-88, she would be the ace-maker of night fighter forces until the purpose-built HE-219 Uhu showed up on scene. In these scenarios, the Schläge Musik sets would be immensely useful. Aimed at an upward angle, 2 to 4 cannon could be used to tear into the bombers as the Bf-110 wormed her way into positions from their blind spots. Aided with specialized variants of the Reflexvisier Revi-16 gun sight, the bombers became easy prey. The radar sets offered tactical guidance towards targets, often at altitudes where the window countermeasures were of little use. The weapons officers of today's air forces had their predecessor in those men who stared into these 3 cathode ray displays in search of those bombers who were intent to light their cities below ablaze in terror campaigns that would make Douhet proud. As civilians suffered in the nocturnal infernos of British bombers, they wavered not in their determination to fight, and German industry only increased, proving Wever completely correct. Against the nominally precise bombing raids of the daytime and the incendiary-laden Lanks at night, the Bf-110 did her job and did it well. From November 1943 to March 1944 alone, over 1,100 British bombers fell to this little miscreant of the Luftwaffe. Delayed by 5 years from drawing board to deployment, built to meet no true need, disliked by the Chief of Staff who accepted her, terrifically poor in combat, and a drain on the best of the Luftwaffe's resources, she failed in every respect to meet anything for which she was designed. It would only be as a night fighter that this strategic offensive fighter became a shining star, flying over the fatherland itself instead of foreign skies. Often hated, frequently disliked, and rarely loved, she would be the knave in the Luftwaffe's deck, designed in pipe dreams and forced into a hand that would inevitably be folded. Well, thank you all so much. I knew this one took a little while to put together, but I also know that you all enjoy them since This Day in Warbird History is definitely my most popular series. I do want to keep up the pace, of course. Unfortunately, these daily videos, narrated or not, are going to be difficult to keep up on a daily basis. So if you could please consider supporting these creations, your contributions really do matter. Subscriptions on Patreon start for as little as $3, and as soon as I start to get a few more subscribers, you'll have access to exclusive content, since I'll then have the time to produce it. In the meantime, please share this video with your friends and your groups, especially if you liked it. I really do hope you share your thoughts and comments on here. And always remember to check in regularly to see what you might have missed and for new content. This is Claire, and I am the Warbird Mistress. Take care.